Okay, students, we're going to go over a few things about solving absolute value equations. Please remember, absolute value is your distance from zero. So if it is the distance from zero, it will always evaluate to a positive number. So if I have something like 2, it is true that I could plug in a positive 2 because the absolute value of positive 2 would be equal to 2. But I could also plug in a negative 2 because the absolute value of negative 2 was equal to 2. So that means when I go to solve this equation, I'm actually going to just basically write two separate equations, one for the positive side and one for the negative side. So in this case, I'm going to have x is equal to 2, and I'm going to also have x is equal to negative 2. Now, when I go to do my next equation, in this case, it's harder to see and think about plugging in, but it's still true. I can divide it into a positive and a negative part. So I can have the x plus 4 is equal to 2, and I can also have the x plus 4 is equal to negative 2. Both of those two separate equations, the one that is positive and the one that is negative, now can be solved. So one equation positive, one equation negative. Do notice as I do that, I did not change anything inside the absolute value because x plus 4, what was inside the absolute value, could equal positive 2. X plus 4 could also equal negative 2. As I continue to solve, I would need to subtract 4 from both sides. So subtracting 4 from both sides here will give me a x equals negative 2. Looks like I needed a little bit more room to write. And subtracting 4 from both sides there will give me an x equals negative 6. Now, both of these answers, the negative 2 and the negative 6, are correct. In fact, if I plug a negative 2 where this x is, I'm going to end up with a negative 2 plus 4 is going to be negative 2. Absolute value of negative 2 would be 2. On the other hand, if I plugged in a negative 6 in the same place, negative 6 plus 4 is positive 2, and then the absolute value of negative 6 plus 4 is negative 2, and then that absolute value is still positive 2. Usually you get two solutions, one that's positive, one that's negative. Occasionally, if you have an absolute value that turns out to equal 0, like this one over here, if I try to split this into two equations, I can have x minus 3 equals 0, but then the other thing I would have was x minus 3 is negative 0. Really not any such thing as a negative 0, so there's no point of even writing that down. So there's no way to write that as two different equations since it equals 0. So that's one common way you'll have an absolute value equation that does equal only one solution. So that now, as far as no solutions, the main reason that happens is if you have an absolute value that turns out to equal a negative number. Although you can have a negative value for x to plug in an absolute value, the absolute value itself cannot equal a negative number because there's nothing in the world, no matter what I plug in for x, the absolute value of that number minus 1 would be a positive number. There's no way to make it negative, so there's no way to have no solutions. I hope this gives you an introduction to how to solve absolute value equations and the need to split them into two parts, one part where the right side becomes positive and the other part where the right side becomes negative.